For more on the countermeasures that Israel is taking against lone wolf type attacks, my colleague Asieh Namdar spoke to Matthew Duss. He's president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace.
Well, I think we've seen Israel take a number of steps, some of which they've had a larger presence of the IDF in areas where the Palestinian Authority has had control. We've seen a lot more incursions into Palestinian communities. We've also seen the Palestinian Authority security services themselves stepping up and increasing and continuing, I should say, their coordination with the Israeli security services. I think we see these kinds of attacks ebb and flow based on some of what else is happening. If we see an increase in settlements, or we see responding to attacks from settlers, we'll see response in the form of these lone wolf attacks. But I think Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and I think that coordination has to be understood and stressed, even though Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't often credit the Palestinian Authority with working with the IDF as much as I think he should.
So there is coordination going on between the two sides, even though the peace talks are virtually non-existent between the two sides.
Clearly, yes. I mean, this is something that you hear from Israeli security officials, American security officials, European and Palestinian security officials, even though the trust between the Palestinian and the Israeli leadership is very, very low. And there are serious concerns and opposition to, obviously, the settlements and the occupation, etc. That coordination between the security services, Israelis and Palestinians, continues, and there is a level of trust that has been developed, although that trust is often undermined by the continuation of the settlements and the occupation.
And I want to talk about in a minute, but let's talk about if there's really, truly a way to prevent these types of attacks 100%. There isn't really.
There really isn't. I mean, we see that here in the United States as well. If an individual is motivated to carry out an attack like this, I mean, we're talking about people who are just taking a knife, a kitchen knife, a pair of scissors, or even a gun, a car, just acting on their own. And I think we really need to not only be aware of how difficult it is to track and prevent those attacks, but also understand what is driving these attacks. And here we should refer to what the Shin Bet, the Israeli Internal Security Services themselves, has said is helping drive these attacks. It's the lack of horizon, it's the lack of hope, it's the lack of the belief, the idea that this occupation will never end. These young people who are carrying out these attacks simply have no other option.
So what do we tell these young people when there is no hope, when there is tremendous frustration, which leads sometimes to desperation and violence?
Right. Well, I think we have to show these young people, or help their leaders to show them, that the steps that the Palestinian leadership is taking, engaging in diplomacy, engaging in multilateral organizations, engaging in nonviolent methods to end the occupation, are actually bearing fruit. And this is where I think steps that could be taken at the UN, efforts to act against settlements, either in the form of a UN Security Council resolution or EU measures taken individually against the settlements, just something that shows them that violence is not going to help you achieve your goals. Violence will not get you what you want. It's engaging in these other nonviolent tactics.
And I have to ask you about the future of peace talks. Do you see that with a new head at the UN Security Council, at the UN? Do you see that finally going in the right direction, where these two sides will talk, but the Israelis say as long as Hamas controls Gaza, it's going to be hard to have these kinds of negotiations?
Well, when the Israelis say that, they are correct. I mean, the fact that the Palestinians are divided between Gaza and the West Bank, Hamas in Gaza and Fatah in the West Bank, the fact that there is a Palestinian leadership that is unable to make credible commitments for the full Palestinian national movement, that's a problem. Now, we should also recognize that Israel itself, especially this government, has taken steps meant to maintain and exacerbate that division. However, the fact remains, until the Palestinians come to some sort of reconciliation and reunify, negotiations will be tough.
And how much do you think this conflict has sort of dropped off the radar? We've got the conflict in Syria, we've got Iraq, we've got Afghanistan. Do you think part of the problem is just we've become desensitized to what's going on in that part of the world?
Well, I think it's a number of those things. I mean, first of all, yes, by constantly seeing the news, I think we do sort of become just desensitized in the idea of occupation and the kind of low level of violence. Although it's never really a low level for Palestinians who endure it, it just becomes kind of normalized. But yes, when we look at the broader region, things like Syria, things like Yemen, things like Libya, if we're talking about what's the worst crisis, the Palestinian issue has kind of slipped down the list of priorities. I would say, however, that as we see year after year, especially as it relates to Jerusalem and the holy sites, this conflict does have a way of reasserting itself time after time, and we still see leaders in the region, particularly more authoritarian leaders, who will constantly return to the Palestinian issue as a way to kind of demonstrate their bona fides.